everyone, welcome back to Killer Instinct. My name is Avery Smith and I am your host, and in today's episode we will be dissecting Dahmer. If you're new here, this is my YouTube show Killer Instinct, where I will be looking at 4 of the most famous serial killers and figuring out what thing in their life had the most significant impact on their choice to kill people. So like I said, this episode will focus on Jeffrey Dahmer, so we're going to take a look at his childhood and his traumas and his psychological exams and kind of determine the most impactful thing that made him become a serial killer. If you missed the first episode of the series, which focused on Ted Bundy, you can head over to our YouTube channel, JHS Creative Communications, and check that out. Thank you for watching my video. Let's get started and dissect Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to his parents Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Dahmer. The Jeffrey Dahmer profile on thoughtco.com stated that Jeffrey Dahmer was always kind of a social and outgoing child. He took part in typical toddler activities up until the age of 6 when he underwent hernia surgery, and this is where his personality really started to change and he just became really antisocial and kind of personal to himself, which I will talk more about later, but that's all I'm going to say now for that part. The Dahmer family moved to Ohio in 1966, and Jeffrey Dahmer continued to be shy and very antisocial, but this is when some of the more disturbing stuff happened, and he started to collect roadkill, strip the animal carcasses, and save the bones. And if you watched episode 1, you know that Ted Bundy also started doing things like this from a young age, so it's a little bit concerning. Dahmer then attended Revere High School, and he continued again to be very shy, very lonesome, a loner, but this is when he started to develop a very bad drinking problem. Dahmer's parents divorced when he was 18, and he went off to college at Ohio State University, but he only spent 2 semesters there before returning home due to his drinking problem. This is when Jeffrey's dad ultimately gave him an ultimatum, which was either A, get a job, or B, join the army, and he chose to join the army. He enlisted for 6 years, but he got kicked out after 2 due to his continuous drunkenness. Okay, enough background information. Now we're going to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer's first victim. The first known victim of Jeffrey Dahmer was a man named Stephen Hicks, who was an 18-year-old hitchhiker. Jeffrey picked him up on the side of the road and brought him back to his dad's house, where the two ended up drinking together in the summer of 1978. When Stephen tried to leave for the night, Dahmer hit him in the back of the head with a barbell and ended up killing him. He then cut up the body of Stephen Hicks into a bunch of small pieces. Hopefully by this point you can understand why I named this episode Dissecting Dahmer. Dahmer then put the small pieces of Stephen Hicks's body into garbage bags and buried the bags around the surrounding woods of his father's house. Dahmer's crimes were particularly gruesome, and they also involved cannibalism and necrophilia. Cannibalism is when you eat human body parts, and necrophilia is when you have sexual intercourse or are attracted to dead bodies. When Jeffrey Dahmer was choosing his victims, he would normally meet them at a gay bar, and he would lure them back to his house with the promise of money. There, he would rape and murder these young boys. Dahmer would ultimately cut up the bodies into little pieces, and he would also sometimes eat them. Attorney Gerald P. Boyle stated that Jeffrey Dahmer ate the body parts with the purpose of his victims coming alive again inside of him. Boyle also states that Jeffrey Dahmer would often perform sex acts on the bodies after they were dead, and he killed the young boys to extend his time of pleasure. It is also said that Dahmer would skin some of his victims. He would clean the skulls and spray paint them. He would also keep body parts in formaldehyde in his freezer so that he could look at them, and he also kept preserved human hearts. Dahmer also said that while he was preparing one of his victims' biceps to eat for dinner, he softened it with Crisco in a meat tenderizer and fried it on a skillet. That's insane. Okay, that's enough gory details about his killings. Let's dive into the selection and see why I think Jeffrey Dahmer did all these things. I found a college project done by the Regis University that had a lot of psychological facts about Jeffrey Dahmer, so that is going to be my main resource for this. The first quote that I picked says that Lionel Dahmer, who's Jeffrey Dahmer's dad, does explain that there were several family issues that occurred when Dahmer was a childhood that may have inevitably harmed Jeffrey Dahmer in a psychological manner. One of the issues that he went through that was the most impactful was what I talked about earlier with his hernia surgery. There was a small chance that his genitals would have had to been cut off, and Lionel Dahmer did state that he thinks this is why Jeffrey chose to cut off his victims' genitals. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is not confirmed. This is not confirmed information, but there was a rumor going around that Jeffrey Dahmer was actually molested by a neighborhood boy when he was 8 years old, and if this alleged sexual abuse is true, this explains why he targeted young boys himself. The next quote also comes from Lionel himself, and it says that what cannot be denied is the abuse and neglect that Jeffrey experienced as a child. In this project, it also states that Jeffrey Dahmer struggled with conduct disorder as well as antisocial behavior. Conduct disorder applies to children who continuously, violate other people's rights and just, continuously do stuff that is inappropriate without any guilt or remorse. When children struggle with conduct disorder, it normally develops in the early ages of their lives, and because of the lack of remorse and guilt that they have, they are often violent towards other people and animals, and in this case, that explains a lot about what Jeffrey Dahmer was doing at his young ages with the roadkill and stripping the bones. Antisocial behavior is defined as a mental health condition in which a person has a long-term pattern of manipulating, exploiting, or violating other people's rights. Okay, this is the quote that I'm picking. This is my selection. This came from Jeffrey Dahmer's dad himself, and it states that the neglect and subsequent emotional abuse were the primary influencing factors for Jeffrey Dahmer's later murders. It literally states that these were the influencing factors, the emotional abuse and the neglect that he faced as a child. So to conclude, I do think that the emotional childhood abuse that he went through was the biggest impact on the life choices that he later made. I do obviously think that to some extent it is a psychological thing that he was dealing with, but I also think that the neglect from his childhood also had a big impact on his choices later in life. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode, Dissecting Dahmer. Remember, because he dissects people. Please make sure that you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, JHS Creative Communications. You can also give our podcasts a listen at JHS Creative Communications on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Comment down below and let me know if you guys agree with me or if you think I was wrong. Let me know what the most impactful thing you think is. Thanks again for watching. I'm your host, Avery Smith, and this has been Killer Instinct.